All right, moving on to ERDs. So ERD definition. So ERDs are just inconsistency exits that exist between students' exit reason and subsequent enrollment status in a school. So we have three types of ERDs: A, B, C, D, and E. So A, B, E are all enrollments that do not expect a a new enrollment to be reported in. So for complete re-enrolled, so any student who is a graduate who was marked as a completer should not have a new enrollment in CalPADS. If you've submitted an enrollment in this new year, the prior enrollment is a completer, you will get a enrollment type A ERD. So this normally happens if you have a completer that graduated and you have a graduate exit in the prior year. It could be because you combined an SSID that was already exited in CalPADS. So that's one scenario why you have an exit, because normally you won't be able to create a new enrollment if a student was exited as a graduate last year. Okay, so that's A, and also if you have students who went to college, you have a T280 and you re-enroll the student, you would get an A as well. B is you have a dropout. So if you exited the student with an E400, E140, those kids, and if the prior LA had that exit reason and you now re-enroll the student, then you would get that notification. And then E is that you are re-enrolling the student, but then you have a different school. So we will discuss E and D later on. A and B. So the A and B are more like notifications for you. You really don't have control over it. It's just that the prior LEA has an exit code that they have to be corrected. Or if the student was E400, then of course, if you pick up the enrollment, then you could probably notify the LEA that, hey, we have the student here. So that way they can change their enrollment exit to a T160 if it's a E400. Now, if the student was SARB, then that could be a different scenario. Okay. And then for C and D, these ERDs are that you exited the student with, let's say, a T160, but there was no subsequent enrollment reported in CalPADS up until census day. So these are your lost transfers. These are your, if you have E155s and you no longer have a subsequent enrollment, then you have a lost transfer dropout. Okay, and then for D, this is essentially saying that you have a mid-enrollment exit and CalPADS expects a new enrollment the next day at the same school. So that's C and D. So for ERD detection, it uses for A, B, and C, it uses any exits from 816 last year up to 815 this year are essentially considered. Okay, so if there are any discrepancies, any exit discrepancies during this time period, this will be included on your ERD list. And so this loss transfer is from 515 all the way to census day and also for your mid-year update. Okay. So here is a list of exits that may cause ERDs. Okay. So I don't have to, you can just review that once you've downloaded the PowerPoint. But the bottom line is if there is a prior enrollment with any of this and you re-enroll the student, then you will get an A. And that also happens for B. And then if you, as the LA, exited the student as an E155, 56, T160, but there are no subsequent enrollment, then that would be a loss transfer dropout. Okay. All right. So here are your exits that do not cause ERDs. So let's say if you have the student exited as an E23480, which means the student was promoted or matriculated. So this happens for your 7th graders, your 6th graders who move on to the next school. Then if you exit the student with a 480, it so happened that there was no subsequent enrollment for that SSID, then you won't get any ERDs for that. If you use E155 or T160, then of course that would trigger an issue. So these are some exits that will not cause ERDs if there are no subsequent enrollments in CalPETS. Again, the cutoffs are, so the cutoffs here would be depending on the type of ERD. So if you have exits, then if you have loss transfers, then it would use 816 to 101. And that also goes for your E150s, your type E and D ERDs. And then for dropouts, any dropouts between 816 2024 up to 815 2025. And then from graduates, that would be the same case. Okay. All right, so how do you resolve ERDs? Obviously, ERDs could be resolved by correcting the start date or exit dates. And this is for loss transfers. So if, let's say, the student was exited with a T160 in the prior school in this year, and then a student was re-enrolled at the new school after 10-1, which was, by mistake. If the student was enrolled at that school prior to 10-1, then of course, by correcting the start dates, they should be able to then resolve the ERDs. So you could even correct exit reasons or completion statuses. You could delete an enrollment record and get a new SSID if, let's say, you've accidentally combined an SSID and it turned out the SSID you inherited had a 12th grade enrollment record last year with a E23100. And that's basically not the student that you should have picked up. So you could probably just remove your enrollments. You probably hijacked an SSID, so you have to remove all of your data and acquire a new SSID. Then, of course, if there is a missing expected enrollment, you just have to submit the enrollment record for this subsequent enrollment that should be reported in CalPETS. So the common causes of type A, again, you have students who did not really complete high school. So let's say if the student was at LAA last year and the student was marked T280 and then the student re-enrolled at your district, then of course that is a incorrect status. So the prior LAA could change the student's exit to a E155 or T160, or you can just ignore it because that was probably what the student mentioned to you. But then again, ERDs will not impact your ability to certify. Okay, so the 2% threshold will only be because of MIDS and CCEs. So if you have a T280, which was the correct exit from the prior LEA, then you can just ignore it. Okay, so you have a student that really did not complete high school last year. So maybe the student needs to be exited with a E156, right? Instead of a completion exit. Okay. And then if you have two or more SSID sharing this SSID, then of course you have to acquire your own SSID and start your own enrollment. Okay. And then the student is a valid completer and re-enrolled. In some situations, the student is allowed to continue attending high school after they complete. So you have your E23360, and then essentially the student wanted to complete some credits, and so they re-enroll at your district. So that could be one of those scenarios. And then for B, you have a student who was exited with a dropout exit. So you have E400s, E140. So and it turns out the student then re-enrolled at your district. Then of course you could notify the prior district to say, hey, we have your student then they could change their exit with a T160 if it was an E400. Now, if the student was SARB, then of course that E140 should stick because they already went through the SARB process. And then another cause of type B ERD again is that if you unintentionally picked up the wrong SSID. Common types of C, right? So a student is a dropout. So meaning, let's say, if a student was exited, unintentionally exited with an E155, however, the student really was SARBed, then of course you mark this as an E140. Or let's say you have an E155 and you just did not submit the new enrollment this year, then by all means submit that new enrollment. That way you have a subsequent active enrollment after this exit record. Or again, if you unintentionally hijacked an SSID, picked up the wrong student's SSID, so you just have to remove your enrollment and subsequent information and create your own SSID. So D is just essentially an E150 student that don't have a subsequent enrollment in CalPEDS. Okay, and E is essentially the same student that did not have a subsequent enrollment at the same school in CalPEDS. Okay, let's do the demo. Here we go. All right, so for type A, so I have here a student who was, so this is the completer exit, right? So student was exited with a T280. So Pleasanton Unified was informed that the student who was 11th grade will just move on and go to college. So he was marked T280. But then the student then enrolled at my district in the next academic year, and so I get a type A enrollment ERD. If the exit was incorrect, the easiest fix here is that to mark the student as an E155 or a T160. Now, if the student really did say that they were going to college, then I guess you can just leave it as T280 and still have the ERD in there but then I would still get the ERD as the receiving district, which I could ignore. So to ignore that, I can just mark it as resolved. That way it doesn't bother me when I look at my ERD list, right? So that is a way to resolve it. Now, let's say you've hijacked an SSID, unintentionally picked up an SSID, and this student was an E230-100, right? So there's no validation when CalPEDS combines an SSID that has a graduate exit. The only validations for mids right now would be based on the plan conflict, based on the SIGA conflict, and just an overlapping enrollment. It doesn't validate for an exit of a graduate. So it turns out if you pick the SSID, you now have a graduate on your hands, right? So, and now you have here all of this other information that shouldn't be associated to your student. So what do? By all means, remove your enrollment from this SSID and generate your own SSID. Okay, if you have supporting records here, delete those records associated to you and then move on and create your own SSID. So number 2, we have here type B. So the student was SARB, right? So apparently the student was SARB by Temple City Unified. The student left in March. They couldn't get in touch with the student. They went through the SARB process and the student never responded. And so they then just marked the student as an E140. And here you are the next year. You pick up the student. And so you're now getting a type B ERD for this. So you then reach out to Temple City Unified and say, hey, I'm getting a type B ERD for this student. Um, is this correct? Did you serve the student? If they say yes, then you just leave it as is and mark your ERD as resolved. Now, if they say, oh, no, we picked the wrong exit code. So if that's the case, they just have, to fix their exit and that should resolve your ERD. However, be warned that if a student is already in E140, meaning they have been SARB, it is proper to just leave that exit there because the student already went through the process of truancy and SARB. So, and then you just mark that on your end as resolved. Okay. So that's the type B ERD. So for type C, we have two scenarios here. Right. So why is this a loss transfer dropout? The first one who answers the correct will have a customized AI, soundtrack from Marshall.
There's an answer, Kyra Naomi,
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
Okay.
Where is
That's a
it?
deal. That's a deal.
Okay,
but
I'll go for it.
Naomi.
she's not specific, but she's on the right track.
All right. Was it that enrollment one done until October? More than 30 days? So I'll give you another chance, Naomi. Be specific. Why is it a loss transfer? Was it that enrollment was done until? All right. Anyway, yeah, you're close, Naomi. So essentially, the reason why is that even though the student was a T160 and there is a subsequent enrollment, that enrollment was after census day. See how in the timeline for ERD for a loss transfer, if there are no subsequent enrollments up to census day, then the student becomes a loss transfer dropout. Guess because there's no subsequent enrollment in this current year. So to fix this, if it could be fixed, you can reach out to Dublin and ask them, hey, I've exited the student on 9:15 or 8:15. Did the student really start at your district on 10:06? And then, if they look at their records and it turns out the student started at their district earlier, maybe September or maybe on 10/1, then if that's the case, then they delete their enrollment, recreate it with the correct exit start date, let's say 10/1 or September 30, then that removes the student on your loss transfer dropout list because the student has an enrollment on or before census day. Okay. Now, if the student really enrolled there on 10/6, then there's nothing you could do. You can just take the hit and just mark it as resolved. And then on your reports, it would just show as a loss transfer dropout. Does the expected school of attendance matter? It does. I mean, yeah. It, this is optional though. If you mark them as a T160, this is optional. If that's what your question is. So, but then again, it all boils down to the enrollment start date of the subsequent enrollment. So if let's say this enrollment was on September, then that student is not a loss transfer dropout. If this enrollment is after 10/1, which is census day, then it is a loss transfer dropout. All right, we have another one here. Yeah, so Oscar the Grouch was last year. I exited the student with an E155. However, there is no subsequent enrollment this year, and so me as the exiting LEA in the prior year will get a loss transfer dropout C. So two things here that you could consider. Maybe you could check, is the student still enrolled at your district this year? If yes, by all means submit their enrollment this year. Okay. If not, then check where the student went. Did the student go somewhere else? You could even, if the parents are not responsive, what you could do, and you suspect the student, no way the student just disappeared out of the blue, right? What you could do is do a demographic search. Maybe, just maybe, a new SSID was requested for that student. So there might be two in here. And so that would explain why you have a loss transfer. And so if you discover that, then you could reach out to that new LEA who picked up that student and then tell them that you have a SSID, you have an SSID for that student in CalPads already. And so they could probably just pick up your SSID, or if they've already created one, then they have to combine the SSIDs if and only if it's the same student, right? So I mean, CalPAS anomaly is really a tedious work. You just have to, if you like investigating scenarios, investigating enrollments, then you'll have fun with CalPAS anomalies. Lost transfer dropouts still count as dropouts for fall one because they were not picked up. There is just a report that will, I think the statewide, I think that's not even a report anymore. Let's see here. Certification reports. Are we still? I believe that's not. So there was a statewide. So the state view, they will be included in here on the state view dropout count.
Also, one of the 8.1s is a state view.
Yeah, this one here, they will be included here too. But then for the actual dropouts, E140, E400, E230, what are the dropout codes we had there again? If those are actual dropout, then they would be under this part here, dropouts by subgroup. And then 112, they will be under 18 and 112. But if it's a loss transfer, they will just show up under the state view counts, which is officially isn't actually a dropout. It's just a state view that there was no enrollment in the subsequent year, I mean. All right, so that's for loss transfer C. Again, you have to rely on, let's just go back here. If you have questions on the type of exits that might cause it, so here it goes. So if you have an directly an E140, E230, 300, E400, T380, this will show up on the dropout reports. If it's just a loss transfer with any of this, it will show up on the dropout state view reports. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to type D.
There's a question, Kyron.
Yeah. So if a family informs us that they will be moving to another public school in California, T160, but no others who have picked them up, we're just ignoring that and marking them resolved, right? Yes. If they mention that they're moving to another public school, maybe reach out to that LEA first before ignoring it. Reach out to that LEA to see if they indeed went on and attend that school. If so, you can keep that ERD as is for now, just so to track if they've already submitted their new enrollment or not. Just
I would think what Carla is also pointing out is important is you won't be able to resolve every ERD.
that's correct.
That's why they're not included in your anomaly percentage for fall one. So a student that you report with the E140
Mm-hmm.
will have the same result as a T160 if there is no subsequent enrollment on census day.
Yeah.
So a lot of time new LEAs work hard to try to resolve every single ERD. And the end result is the student will be a dropout. If the student, if honestly told you they were going to transfer and they don't show up, a T160 is an appropriate exit, but there will be a subsequent dropout reported.
Yeah. And then, as Marcia pointed out, maybe just maybe they generated the new SSID. You could search by demographics too. You'll never know. And if it all boils down to the student not re-enrolling, then it is what it is. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to type DERD. So this happens when you have a mid-year exit, right? When you're telling us that you're using E150, the expectation is you're just trying to correct an enrollment scenario in CalPAD. Sometimes you just want to add a inter-transfer agreement, maybe, or there was a change in the inter-district transfer, or there's a change in the grade level if the student got promoted within the year to a higher grade level, then you use an E150 and add the new grade level here. Or if the student was demoted, unfortunately, you do the same. Use an E150 and then add the new enrollment with the start date, which is the next day. So now you have an ERD, a discrepancy. If you use an E150 and there is no subsequent next day enrollment at the same school. So the question is, if that was the case, you have to investigate, right? So if you just by mistake did not report the new enrollment, then by all means submit that new enrollment in CalPADS. It should be the next day, so 8:15, and then the new enrollment should start with 8:16 at the same school. Okay? So any variation to that, if you move them to another school or if the date is 2 days after, then you will have an issue with an ERD. So when you are just updating an enrollment because of a new grade level, then use an E150 exit. Okay, so for this, number one, the question is the student still here? Yes. Why did we exit the student with an E150? Maybe the student should be in first grade. So you add that here, add the new grade level. Now, the question is, okay, is the student here? No. So what exit would you have? Maybe it's a T160. Maybe the student was a no-show. So then, if that's the case, then you have to change both the exit code and the exit date, right? So the exit date would be the same as the enrollment start date and mark them as an N470. So there are a lot of scenarios as to why there was a mistake here. So you have to communicate with your school site, with your school secretary for that matter. Now, if this is just a simple, I missed this enrollment, right? So just add the new enrollment. Now, wait a minute. This student was exited on 8:15. What is 8:15? Because that's another issue, right? Sometimes LAs have a habit of if the change happened on a Friday, which is I believe 8:15 is a Friday. Let me just and someone I couldn't open my calendar here. But let's say 8:15 is a Friday, right? So and now you can add a new enrollment which is a Saturday because your SIS won't help you do that, right? So what do? Right? So the rule here is that if the change happened on a Friday, you should adjust your exits. Okay? You either exit the student on a Thursday, that way you can add the next day enrollment of a Friday, or you just exit the student on a Monday, that way you can add a Tuesday enrollment here. But bottom line is that enrollment should be a next day enrollment. Okay? So School of Attendance, Training Emerson, and then grade level, let's say student should be first grade. And then 8:16. Let's just assume this 8:16 is not a Friday. Yeah, it's a Friday. So what do? So we should have exited the student on an 8:14 and then added the 8:15 enrollment. So but due to time constraints, let's just assume that this was a Friday and enroll the student. No valid is okay. Put that student there and then post the record. And now that should resolve your E150 because the student is at the same school. Okay. Now we have another one here. Okay, there you go. So next day enrollment would resolve it. Okay. Another scenario is this. Type E, ERD. So essentially what happens here is you have an E150, but then instead of the student being re-enrolled at your district, it turns out the student left and went to a different district. So this is a simple change to the exit reason. You just change this to a T160 if the student really indeed went to Dublin. Okay. If not, then of course you have to talk to Dublin and check why they have an enrollment there. So for this, it's a simple change of the exit code, and that should resolve the issue. Okay. So the student just, your school secretary just inadvertently updated the or choose the wrong exit code. So if I choose T160, now that should resolve our mid anomalies or ERD. So that's how to resolve your ERDs. Well, you could do that, Natasha. You could exit on a Sunday and roll on Monday. So it's up to you. Sometimes you have SIS that don't allow any dates during the weekend. But CalPAS would allow it. It doesn't really see if the date that date is a Sunday or a Monday, but your SIS will. All right. So once your anomalies have been resolved, let me just demo the ERD. I go back here. I go back to my ERDs. So now I've resolved my ERDs, and now if I click on apply filter, I only have Oscar the Grouch here. Which why did I not have this? So all of the rest have been marked as, yeah, it's a loss, really a loss transfer. So I can just open this and mark this as resolved, or or save reviewed, and then internally you could then investigate this. So this save reviewed is just a way for you to filter the exits, because the ERDs, because if you have 100 ERDs here, then of course it would lessen your list. That way, if you pick on the review indicator as reviewed, then it should filter this out too, right? And so that should resolve it. And now we don't have any on the list, right? So that's just more of a clerical functionality. Okay, so that's how to resolve anomalies.